Alrighty, I'm going to answer the question, navy bean chowder. Now, most times when people have an experience with navy bean soup, it tends to be a little bit pureed. Now, I'm going to give you a recipe and demonstrate the formula and technique with that recipe that will allow you to either serve it as a chowder, meaning a broth with food in it, or you can also make it into that kind of navy bean that's a little pureed by pureeing some of the beans and adding them back into the beans a little bit to give it a little body. And I'm going to show you both versions in the finished bowl on this soup when we're done here, okay? We're going to start out by adding the rendered bacon to the pot we're going to cook the soup in, okay? And the bacon fat, that's what you got to have. I got about a half a cup, 3/4 of a cup. And there's the bacon. And we're going to add the mirepoix, celery, carrots, and onions in accordance to the ingredient list that you have. We're going to use a little bit of thyme also in this soup, dried thyme. You can use fresh thyme if you want, because we're going to add some fresh herbs to this original cooking process, and we're going to use chicken stock. Now, we're going to end up garnishing this soup with a little bit of green cabbage and blue cheese, and that'll be an option. But you'll find that this process, mirepoix, bacon, tomato concasse, mushrooms, garlic, stock, and beans, is a good formula for just about any kind of bean soup you want to make, all right? I'm going to cook that just a little bit. Now, one of the things about the navy beans, which you should be aware of when you proceed to make the soup or you begin to plan for making this soup, is number one, these beans need to be soaked overnight in the refrigerator. You do not soak beans out of the refrigerator or anywhere, any kind of bean. They have a tendency, they can go sour on you overnight in your house. Now the tomato concasse, which is in the earlier part of this text, and you can click on that when you need to know how to make it, but we have some pre-made for the recipe here. And these veggies are looking good. I'm going to add the mushrooms in here, and I'm going to add a little bit of butter. Your recipe tells you that if you don't have enough bacon fat in here based on the amount of bacon that you're adding to it, supplement it with a little bit of butter. So we'll throw a little chunk of butter in here. And we're going to use some fresh tarragon. Those are my soaked beans right there. Fresh tarragon, a little bit of basil, and a little bit of parsley combined. I'm going to throw that in the original cooking process. And then at the end of the cooking process, we can add some more fresh herbs to them, or even sprinkle some on each individual bowl if we wanted to, you know. They just certainly add a nice touch to the item. This is the fresh tarragon. And this is the basil. You don't want any of the stems from the tarragon in there. They're a little tough. It's a little bit like putting rosemary stems in something. They're just a little too tough for things for most of us to eat also. Okay, there's a little bit of tarragon, a little bit of basil. Let's chop that up. Let's add that to the pot. And let's stir that around for a second. Let's give it one more minute to cook, and let me finish that thought I had about when you plan to make navy bean soup. A couple of things that you should consider. One, navy beans, even though they're soaked overnight in cold water, they take an extended period of time, among beans that is, to get tender enough to eat. So you may have to cook this for an hour and a half, 2 hours, 2.5 hours, depending on how high you have it cooked, before they're tender enough to eat. So you need a little more planning when you make these versus when you make lentil soup or black bean soup, for example. They're both much, much quicker, lentil being the quickest of these three I just mentioned. Okay, now I'm going to show you where the veg is here. And as you can see, the veg is half to 3/4 of the way sauteed. Looks nice. And keep in mind now, when you're cutting your mirepoix, the celery, carrots, and onions for this type of soup, and this soup specifically, that you want to cut them in accordance to the size that you want them to be when they're on the person's spoon when they're eating the soup. You don't want a giant carrot and a little piece of celery and so on. Not only do you want them consistent, but you want them an appropriate size so that they're comfortable to eat. Okay? So now we're going to add the garlic. And we're going to add the tomato concasse. And we're going to add the navy beans. I think I got enough right there. And we're going to add the chicken stock. And we're going to take a long time out for these navy beans to be cooked until they're tender enough to eat. And one of the things that's going to take place during this time elapsed period, which may be as long as an hour before I come back to you immediately, which I will, but in real time it will have been another hour that had passed, is you're going to be constantly topping off this soup so that the food is always covered with the stock. Now, once you've had a certain amount of stock added to it, if it keeps reducing, you may want to just add water to it rather than more stock, because you may end up making the soup too rich by continually adding stock to it that keeps reducing. In effect, you might want to, halfway through the addition of chicken stock, stop and start adding water. You're basically just reconstituting the reduced stock that's already there. Just want to make sure that you have enough liquid in the pot, both when you're done and during the cooking process, okay? So let's just add a little more stock to that because that's going to absorb a lot. And I'll let you take a peek at that real quick so you can see the amount of food that we have in here, see, per liquid. Looks nice already. I love the way this soup looks, you know. There's something about these chowders when the vegetables are handled properly that's really nice. So we're going to time elapse this for whatever length of time it takes, and I will time it and tell you how long it took these particular beans to become tender enough to eat. So I'll be back when they are, and then we'll pick up on where we left off.